Hey everyone, Margarita here. I want to talk in this video today about how my mother has been jealous of me from the time I was born. So I know this is not normal, neurotypical mothering behavior. I'm not exactly sure at what point I fully figured out the full picture, but I did know from the time I was in somewhere around kindergarten to first grade that there was an issue. And I didn't understand how deep the issue truly ran. I just knew there was an issue. And from time to time, I would try to tell this person or that person. But every time I tried to say something, the response was, "Why would your mother do that?" Or, "Oh, your mother wouldn't do that." So when I was being given that response, all of those individuals were thinking of their own sweet, loving mother, not the deranged lunatic I've been dealing with my entire life. So nobody ever did anything about it. And I continued to get that response all the way to the current day. So even some of the reports I've tried to make recently, I do get the same response because still to this day, when I use the words my mother, they think of their own sweet, loving mother. Or I've been told a few years ago, I was told by one police officer, "Oh, just ignore her, it'll stop." And I said, "Yeah, I did that 20 years ago. I cut her completely off. She has no role in my life. There's no relationship. There's been no contact. This is what she does behind the scenes." And then when I tried to order all of the police reports I had made with Brownstown, Michigan, because that report was in Brownstown, that report had also been deleted from their system as well. Um, so I did know every step of the way that there was an issue and that she was constantly lying about me to everybody that she knows, her entire family, her hundreds of family members, all these hundreds, if not thousands, of people she had ever met along the way. And I was aware of that. But by the time I reached age like 10 or so, I gave up trying to tell anybody because nobody was listening to me and I got the same response every time. And every single adult in my life allowed this to continue on. And when you're dealing with a child of that age who's constantly giving consistent answers when this happens every time, somebody should have looked at that as a red flag, and nobody ever did. They all continue to let this go on. Still to this day, that's the current situation. Even family members, any family member I tried to tell, they believe she's this great person, this sweet, nice person, and that's an entire false persona. That's not who she's ever been. That's all fake. And she doesn't ever let the mask slip in front of any of these individuals for them to see who she truly is. So no one ever did anything to stop her. So I know this is so far from anywhere in the realm of normal. Um, but that's also why I bought my first home at 18 and was working from the time I was my first business at 11 and was working at 14. That's why I did that, because I knew I had to go and nobody was listening to me, and that was my only way out. So that's why I cut all ties at 18 and walked in the opposite direction, why there's never been any contact, why there's never been a relationship. So I'll go back to the time I was born because I can line up the entire timeline from the time I was born to the current day, and it would help explain to everyone else how this was allowed to go on, why this is going on. There's all these factors involved, but it would help others to understand how it got to where it is today, because there's just so many things that have happened along the way. And when I'm still trying to explain this to people, people still don't understand because nobody's ever dealt with somebody like this or a mother like this. And then that child or that adult child never being able to receive any type of help getting the situation under control. And the problems and the destruction allowed to just continue on and on and on and on. and grow and grow and grow to the point where my life is backed into a corner until arrests are made, because that's where I've been for the past several years now. Basically, since the 2021 Ford gas bill that she inserted herself in, my life has been backed into a complete corner. Without arrest being made, I can't come out of that corner to the degree that I need things to be, because I can't begin to, well, not that I lost everything. Everything is still flowing, but I can't begin to rebuild from the destruction of the fallout of that, because the chaos, the delusional phone calls, the harassment, all of that is still ongoing. So even if I were to continue forward with everything I've been doing, it's just going to wipe me out again, because these escapades have been ongoing my entire life, and that's going to continue on without arrests being made. I don't have the ability to take another wipeout. So if there's one more wipeout, the result's going to be my death, because of the severe condition I'm left living with, and my younger son is left living with, due to her ongoing crimes. Because we have to have a certain amount of income in order to stay alive, because of the result of her ongoing crimes and harassment. So I'm going to start at the very beginning with all of this and talk about how this all got started, how it got to where it is today. Where it all started is, so my mother's parents, they died when she was fairly young. Her dad died when she was a teenager. So I believe 13, 12 or 13 maybe. I think she was almost 13. And I believe her mother then passed about 5 or 6 years later, when she was 19 or 20. And she had met my dad as a teenager. So probably around the time, I don't know if her dad was still living or not, but they were together as teenagers. So by the time her mother was gone, her and my dad were already married. So she got married at age, I don't know if it was 18, or I think maybe she was 20 around the time she got married. Either way, they were already together for several years. So going forward, they didn't have me until my mom was 27, my dad was 31, and they never had any more kids. And she made sure that everybody knew that she didn't want kids. So eventually I was born, and usually when that happens, even if the mother didn't want the kid, usually there's still a bond, there's still a relationship, things play out normally, the mother comes to love the baby. Because I know there's a lot of situations where that can be the situation, but then once the baby's born, it changes 99% of the time. So that never happened. She never bonded with me. I was also born via C-section. So again, even less bonding. And then because I was a preemie and I was only 5 pounds, I think I was 13 or 14 ounces, I was left at the hospital for an additional week, 1 week to 2 weeks, before they brought me home. And during that time, she was recovering from this C-section, and she was, oh, poor me, I need to be taken care of. I had this C-section, like wanting my dad's attention. So at first, I was still in the hospital, so he was taking care of her. And then at the same time, he was coming up to the hospital to see me, and she wasn't. And then eventually I came home. So when I came home, he continued to take care of me, and probably took care of her a little less at that point. But it didn't matter. She could have still done regular stuff the way other women do when they have C-sections. So I don't really know what that's like, because I never had one, but I know a lot of people who have, and their lives still continue on after they have the baby, like a person who didn't have a C-section. So at that point, by the time I returned home from the hospital, she would have been able to take care of herself by that point. So I think she saw at that point that here he was taking care of me and her even less. And she was triggered by that, along with the fact that she never wanted kids. And it stayed that way. He stayed taking care of me. And again, I was a preemie. I was a newborn. I had no control over any of this. So she kept in the back of her mind, I don't know if this was visible to other individuals around her or if it was just in her head, but she was already resentful toward me for being born, them not wanting kids or her not wanting kids, and then me taking the attention away from her, from my dad. My dad's attention went from her 100% of the time to over 50% of that time having to go to me as a newborn baby. And it stayed that way. So as time went on, so I don't know if postpartum depression was, uh, if that was actually diagnosable back then or not. I don't really know. I've never really looked into that. I am pretty well um, rehearsed on different mental disorders because I've dealt with excessive amounts of individuals with all types of different mental disorders in my life, on all types of levels in every which direction. So I have looked into quite a few different disorders. I'm not sure if that is something they were diagnosing in 1983. So, um, yeah, so I do believe that there was postpartum depression, whether it was diagnosed or not. I'm sure it wasn't diagnosed, but she kept, her thoughts in her head. And I guess you would have to ask family members if she seemed, if she, mentioned anything or they noticed anything around that time frame, because there's no way I would never ever know the answer to that. But I do believe that played a role in this. And then my dad just continued on doing what he was doing with me and then having to pay less attention to her. And I don't know at what point she actually went back to work, or how much time my dad took off work, but it was still him taking care of me all of that time. And as far back as I can remember, so I mean, my earliest memories, I remember stuff from around age 1.5 to 2 years old. And I do believe part of that is due to the brain injuries that I've suffered from. A lot of my memories came back after the first brain injury in 2016, and even more memories after the second one in 2018. And then a lot of those came back all the way halfway through about 2019. Most of my memories came back during that time period. So my memories go further back than probably a regular person due to that. Now I don't know. Yeah, I don't know at what point things started to become more normalized, like in their everyday life. Like when she went back to work or when he went back to work, or I do know that she was working midnights and he was working the day shift. And then I had a cousin who watched me in the in between couple hours for, I don't know how long that went on for. I would say at least an hour or two, maybe in the in between stage of them, working and then one not being off and one being off. So that happened. But as far back as I can remember, she was always mean to me. So when we were alone, she would be mean to me. She made sure nobody else saw her act that way toward me. Just as a little 1.5, 2 year old kid, 3 year old kid, 4 year old kid, didn't matter. She made sure her behavior was very controlled. So when my dad would be home or they'd be together or when he'd come home from work, no matter at what point, as long as he was around, she controlled her behavior so he didn't see her acting this way toward me. And it stayed that way. Actually, it stayed that way. It's still like that to the current day. It went on my entire life, and it didn't dawn on me that he didn't know until 2019 when my memories were coming back. I can actually pinpoint the date and what I was doing in that moment when it all clicked, that he was never aware she was doing that. The entire time, I was under the impression that he knew she treated me that way because of the way she portrayed things, because she's an illusionist and she'll pull off these illusions and make things appear a certain way when it's not. So all those years, I had no clue. I just knew she was really mean to me. I couldn't understand why he never stopped her and then why he didn't act that way toward me. Um, he definitely noticed there was some things off over the course of time. I don't think he understood to what degree. But it continued on that way, and she would make sure her behavior was very controlled. She would drag me off in different bathrooms wherever we were, she would just drag me off into the bathroom and beat the shit out of me, and then take me back out and wherever we were, and then try to pinch me and privately slap me as if nobody could see. I don't really know if anybody could see, but trying to tell me to get that look off my face or shut up or stop crying, because then she's looking guilty. So I don't know if anybody ever noticed that, but it stayed that way the entire time. And then I confronted her around age 4 about poisoning the batches of food. And that's when she became very alarmed and knew I was probably going to try to tell somebody. So she had to start growing a false narrative about me right then and there. And it's never stopped from that day to where we are today in 2025. So in what year was it? Like 1987 or 88 is when I did that. So it continued on from that point forward. And then her behaviors continued on behind the scenes without anybody ever seeing how she was talking to me or how she was treating me. And then as soon as there was another person in the room or wherever we were, she would just act fake the way she does. Nobody's aware that that personality she's presenting to the entire world is a fake personality. That's not who she truly is. And she has it all very well under control for nobody to ever see this. But then once you're in her home, so I don't know, because she had spent longer periods of time with other individuals in her home or her visiting family and whatnot. So I don't know if anybody else has ever noticed this. But again, even if we were traveling and visiting her brothers in California or no matter where we were, she still had it under control and still would treat me like shit and pull all this off, and still nobody's seen any of this. So I just find it really hard to believe that nobody's ever noticed anything all these decades. I mean, at least back then, because then we had no contact for over 20 years from the time I was 18 to the current day. So, but that's why contact was cut. That's part of the reason. So that went on the entire time. And then once I was left the trust fund, which I believe it was 1989, give or take like 6 months in either direction, when that happened, that really set her off. So with how she was already acting, how she perceived things, how she was jealous of me, taking my dad's attention away from her, her life never returned to, the life they had before there was a child in the picture. And that's also why there's no kids as well, no other kids but me. And that should be another big red flag. For as long as they've been married, there should be at least one other child. But it was when the trust fund that was left for me, and we were sitting in the room, and she manipulated my dad to stay outside the room and continue his conversation with the people he was talking to when it was my turn to go in. And so it was just me and her in there with the attorney who had gone over the stipulations. I don't remember the amounts, the dollar amounts of any of this, but I do remember him saying the only way she would get access to it is if I was deemed mentally incompetent or deceased or incarcerated for long periods of time or something along those lines. And right then and there, she had no intention of ever notifying me of this trust or turning it over to me. It was going to be hers. Whatever she had to do to make that happen from that day. She had planned it from that day, from the time we sat there in the attorney's office. And I do know the address of where all this occurred, where the reading, where the will, where all the people who were left something were taken into the office and given the stipulations. I do have the address. I do remember being there and where it all was. And shortly before that, before we got to that building, it was at the end of the funeral where they called a list of people who were left in the will, and we were to attend at the address that I have, where this all happened. And so there was a list of about 15 to 20 people, and my name was called, and she got so excited. She was so excited, you would have thought she won the lotto. Well, now I know why, because she did win the lotto, because she has gained access to this trust fund. She did for about 20 years. And now she's still attempting to gain access to what's left. But there at the end of that funeral, her reaction said it all. I just wanted my name to be called, and I didn't even understand what it really meant. I was just little, and I thought it was cool to have my name called. So I really didn't understand this back then when this was all going on. And because from that point forward, my mother created so much chaos and destruction, with all these problems she created, all these illusions and all this triangulating and phone call placing behind the scenes and painting me to look like this terrible child and this bad person. And she did so much of that my dad never remembered that anything was ever left for me. Even prior to his injury, I do believe, especially because he was not in the room, I'm pretty sure she said something along the lines of, if she goes to college, it'll be paid for. I'm pretty sure that's what she said to him. But with the amount of chaos and harassment and problems she caused, just repeated situations, nobody ever even remembered anything about the trust, and that was her intention. So, uh, once we left, at that point, I do believe she was poisoning batches of food a little more regularly than she probably was prior to this. And um, I didn't start having symptoms of it until I was 10 years old. And around that time also was the time my dad had something wrong with his heart. Something had happened. I don't remember exactly what it was. Something happened, but I do believe it was from the poison batches of food, because it was right around the time I started having what you would call heartburn. It's not heartburn, it's the poison coming back up the body, rejecting the poison. And because of how strange she was, and how I wasn't allowed to like be sick or have anything wrong with me, or I wasn't allowed to ask for help with things. um so I didn't know that there was like Tums or heartburn medication, or I couldn't even say that there was something wrong with me. And even if I had said that, it might have been a worse situation than how I went about living my life and saying nothing and suffering. But that's what all that was all along the way. It took me till, I believe, I figured this out fully, in my early 30s. I fully figured that out around the time my youngest son was born. I had finally pieced it all together, because there was all these periods of time, all this long periods of time where she had no access to my food, a few periods of time in there where she did have some access to my food, and then over the course of time, all these strange batches of food showing up at my house. She was using other individuals to get it into my house, knowing she has no access to my home. She's not allowed in my homes. And so all the pieces kind of came together, and I was fully able to put it together at that point. And then I no longer had a heartburn problem because of that long-term issue and the long-term damage. I had all these other issues. I have permanent issues from it. I don't think it's ever going to go away, but so if I eat one wrong thing, I ingest one wrong thing, or drink one wrong thing, there's a serious issue. I have to get it back up out of my body, even if that means staying by the toilet and vomiting all night and making myself vomit and do it all night long till it comes up and stops. That's how it has to go, because my body can't digest it, because it's permanent damage from the long-term poisoning. So I'm not saying I even have to ingest a batch of her poison food. I'm saying there's a lot of toxic foods out there. There's a lot of like genetically modified substances in a lot of food, modified substances, and there's a problem. I don't know exactly which substances it is within the regular food that's not poisoned, but there are certain things that cause a severe reaction as if I had eaten her food, something very similar to that. And because of the damage, that's how I have to go about it. So around that time when I figured this out, I was able to control that problem. I no longer needed any heartburn medication, because then I fully figured out what the problem was, what was causing it, and I began eating cleaner food all the time, not just here or there, and the problem stopped altogether. So unless I eat something that's too modified or too processed, then I'll have an issue. But as long as I stay away from that stuff, I'm totally fine. But so back then, that's when the poison food all started. I don't know if it started right after the trust was left for me, or if it got, maybe she did it for some years, or maybe she experimented with different substances, and then we just didn't start showing signs of this until I was about 10 years old, because around that same time, my dad also started having this severe itching problem, where he's had to take Zyrtec from that day to the current day. And I do believe it has to do with the poison batches of food. So the two of us began experiencing these strange symptoms. around that time, but still, um, so those issues he was experiencing still going on in the current day, except for since his injury, he ends up in septic shock or near sepsis, or it's settling in, and he's got to get rushed back to the hospital with the condition he's been in since his injury 2.5 years ago. So that is what the poison batches of food caused since his injury to today. And prior to that, he was still having a bunch of urinary tract infections along the way and started showing other signs of systemic toxicity and inflammation internally along the way. Now that I know what I know because of everything I've been through with being poisoned by carbon monoxide and then dealing with the food that she had poisoned, I then looked back over the course of time, saw the effects and where this all kind of pieced together and the timeline of it all and his effects and my effects. I was able to put it all together quite some time ago. So that is what it is. I'm 100% on it. The only thing I don't know is the substance or substances, because I do know it is more than one substance for sure. I do believe it's at least two. And along the way, so I don't know if from the late 1980s to what year did I turn 10? Like 1994 ish. So I don't know if from that time to 1994, if she was just experimenting with different things and trying to figure out what does what, or if it was the same substance or the same couple substances the entire time and we just didn't show effects until that time period. I'm not sure. So that's where the poison batches of food all came in as well. And then going back to shortly after the trust was left for me, she immediately began farming delusions about me by placing delusional phone calls to all of my teachers behind the scenes. She would just place phone calls. And there is proof of this because back before we had cell phones or smartphones or whatever, people used business cards. That's how people would have phone numbers for other people, or people would keep a phone book, but usually they would exchange information with a business card, which some people still do today. But back then, that's how it always was 100% of the time. So I do have pictures of some of these people that she has done this with when I was younger, of their business cards that were dropped off here back in 2019, 2020. She had my dad drop a whole bunch of stuff off here, which actually was proof of her ongoing crimes. Everything in the bin was basically the proof. So I took pictures of the majority of the stuff that was dropped off, and I burned the majority of the stuff as well, including my first haircut. There was a ponytail of my first haircut. There was hair in it. There was my baby shoes. There was all types of stuff that parents would generally keep, but you could tell she was ridding me from her life because I was making posts on Facebook so her family members would become alerted that there is something wrong with this crazy lady, because nobody's ever been made aware that she has this serious problem, and she is the problem, and she's been lying about to everybody about me for all these decades. And that was when my memories were coming back full blown, but I'm sure nobody believed it. Word got back to her, and then she continued on more heavily with this false narrative from that point to where we are today. So all that stuff, there is proof of all that. I do have the pictures. So back then, she was placing delusional phone calls to my kindergarten teacher, my first grade teacher, every teacher from that point forward, from the time the trust was left, behind the scenes, before school would start, or that day, or the couple days into school first starting. She would place delusional phone calls, tell them I'm going to be this problem child, I'm known to lie, I'm known to be a thief, I'm all these things. So I know some of that. I know that she's been telling people I'm always known to lie. You can't trust anything I say. I even have pictures of her texting my dad that after his injury about 2 years ago. I have a picture of it on his phone. It's a picture of his phone with her texting him that. Well, how can you trust anything she says? You know, all she does is lie. So she started that back then. Back then, so nobody would ever believe me if I tried to tell on her for the poison food. And then she did that so that she could get away with taking this trust for herself, because she had planned this long term. She figures she's going to somehow, one way or another, the access to this trust, it's going to be given to her, and she's going to get access to the money and not me. So right then and there, she began starting to make things happen so that that would be the situation going forward, or some point down the line that would be the situation. So every year, that's where she started calling teachers, and they would operate on this false narrative they were told about how I am or how my personality is, or who I am as a person or whatever. And most of those teachers did operate on, I would say at least 50% of them did. And then around middle school. So once I got into middle school, I had a lot more teachers. And then they also had more students. So some of them would participate, some would not. And that's why I always had a really hard time getting through each day, getting through a school day, because then I was being harassed by teachers. So some years were smoother than others. The ones that chose not to participate, I didn't have a problem getting through that school year. So then she painted it as if I was just this problem child who didn't want to do her work or has all these problems at school. It was her causing it. So I was always in extreme mental and emotional distress because of what she was causing. I just wasn't aware at that time that it was her causing all of it. But I was aware she was calling the teachers regularly. I did know that because I had been pulled aside by numerous different teachers along the way. They would yell at me. Some of them would yell at me as if whatever was said about me was true and operate, not even question me. They would just harass me and yell at me. And it stayed that way for the entire school year. Um, and that was a serious issue. There was a couple who did try to, not that they questioned me, but whatever they said to me that she had stated, I said, she's lying. And I kept trying to say that each time this happened. The response I would get is, why would your mother lie? Or your mother wouldn't do that. Your mother wouldn't lie. No, your mother wouldn't lie. So that's how this was able to be carried out long term, all these decades. There was one teacher, you could tell his reaction because of my reaction. He could tell that what I was saying when I was told whatever I was confronted with, because I don't know exactly what it was, but whatever she had said that was the lie, he then pulled me in the hallway, said something to me. And based on my reaction when I said, she's lying, was my reaction. And you could tell I was like emotionally and mentally distraught over it because clearly this has been done many times at this point. And his answer was, why would your mother lie? And by then I was crying and shaking. And I said, I don't know. She always does this. And by my response and what I looked like, he could tell that I wasn't the one lying. Because it's not normal for somebody to have that type of response and what all happened. And I don't know if he gathered with other teachers and they talked about it, or I don't really remember 100%, but I do remember that happened at one point. So she did that throughout the entire time I stayed in school, kept placing these delusional phone calls all along the way. So it would make my life really hard. So I couldn't get through the day. So it would look like I'm just so mentally disordered I can't get through school, or I'm just this problem child. So which would then, in the end, after over a decade of this, would change the result of what I choose to do with my life, get going into 11th, 12th grade and beyond. By the time that occurred, after over 10 years of this going on, it's then changing how I view the world, how I view school, what's actually going on, what I've actually been able to accomplish from that point to the time school's about to be done with. Because there's all these disruptions due to her lying and saying all these things and causing all these problems, then it has my view being different when I already know I can't get through the day. I'm aware it's her causing it, but nobody's listening to me. And then it just made my life so hard that there wouldn't be a reason to continue forward in that direction, which is what she wanted. So she could then paint me to look a different way than who I really am, going down further from there. So that continued on all through school. She was able to get me kicked out of school, and she tried first in 10th grade, called I don't know if she called the school cop lady or the principal or who she actually called. It was at Woodhaven High School. I don't know who she called, but it did make its way to the school cop lady. And then I was interrogated with a friend of mine that lived down the street from me, and she told them we were going to blow up the school. And the lady who interrogated us, she could tell that something wasn't right because we were both very confused separately, and because that wasn't something we were talking about at all. We were both very confused. It got swept under the rug. Nothing came of it. My dad later confirmed that my mother did call. She was trying to stage the incident, is what it is. So she stages different incidences, which she did my entire life all the way to that point. So in front of other people, because she triangulates, manipulates, and then gaslights, which then causes a reactive abuse situation. So when another person steps in and sees, by then I'm screaming and yelling, looking crazy, and it's her who did it, and then she's laughing like a deranged lunatic the entire time. So that went on from the time the trust was left for me. All the way probably till about 2013 was the last time that she was actually able to push my buttons where I react back. Because that, again, there had been no contact for some time at this point. We had very minimal contact for over 10 years at that point. And from that point, I did cut her off 100% again. So there was no even that like 1% to 2% contact that there was, just because we had a separate relationship with my dad at that point, it stopped altogether again, and we actually had to remove my dad as well from my kids being able to go over there freely how they used to be able to. We had to stop that as well. And that was, I believe, the last time she was actually able to pull off like poking the bear and then me reacting. And then going forward, because then there's no contact, you can't do it if there's no contact. And then like going forward, I do believe she tried numerous different ways, but because of the brain injuries and then the memories coming back and how emotionally intelligent I am, because I had to learn to become emotionally intelligent dealing with somebody like her my entire life, it was never able to happen again. And I do believe she made others believe that that would happen, or I would react a certain way to certain situations when she doesn't know me at all. So she's telling other people a false narrative. They just believe it. They enter my life and then they operate as if I'm going to react a certain way, and then I don't. And then they're confused why I don't, or they just think, I don't know what they think, but there's proof along the way, because this has happened with many different people along the way, and they didn't get the reaction out of me that they were expecting. She sent them to cause a situation to get a certain reaction out of me, but that wasn't the result, because I'm extremely emotionally intelligent because of what I had to deal with my entire life. So she didn't realize that I became even more intelligent and had figured the entire thing out by that point. That nobody's going to get the reaction that she's telling people for this or that or this or that, because there's all these different things. But yes, that happened all along the way. Even once my dad became injured, I think she thought that that was going to happen again. It still wasn't able. It wasn't happening, because now by that point, I'm like way beyond where anybody's even got me pegged at. So that was never able to happen. The only problem is when I tried to tell on her for poisoning his food once he was injured, it sounds so absurd and people don't want to believe it, even though there's a clear pattern of the rushes back to the hospital. There's triggers to all of this, which I can pinpoint for, each date or whatever is going on. I could pinpoint. Nobody wanted to even look into it far enough to understand, to let me prove that I do know what I'm talking about. There is proof of this. If you piece everything together over time, there's proof. It never got that far. So the issue I was having is nobody wanting to believe that's going on, even though the proof exists. She was already spinning the false narrative about me in the background with the care facility and the hospitals, which is why I've been banned from many hospitals in the local area and the care facility. So it wasn't able to work in the manner in which she thought it was, but me trying to report this and me doing this for 40 years and nobody ever listening to me, and me getting a negative reaction from people each time and I never get anywhere, that's where the distress comes in. That's where there's always an issue usually, because then I can't like effectively deliver what I'm trying to say, because I already know what the person's reaction is going to be, and then it looks like I have a mental disorder. But at this point I had well, I guess when it all started, I had three brain injuries, had a fourth and a fifth during that time as well. So with all those repeated brain injuries, in the condition I'm in with my own injuries, it then looks like I have this mental disorder, especially when I'm trying to say this, and trying to deliver the information. Then it looks like I have a mental disorder, and because of what I look like, they're not aware I have all these brain injuries, or had another one, the week prior to that or the month prior to that. Still trying to come back from each one, just slowly slipping further and further away. It was causing me to look like I have this mental disorder when they're physical injuries to the brain and long-term abuse. So that's the issue I had with all of that. But all along the way. It's been a problem all along the way. Nobody's ever realized at any point during any of this, there was all these triangulation, manipulation, gaslighting incidences with reactive abuse. I could tell you there's hundreds, if not thousands, of times she pulled that off and was able to pull it off to where it looks like I was the problem. When I was still a minor, so prior to me turning 18, that happened hundreds, if not well over 1,000 times. So eventually I learned how to see through people's like manipulation and see different mental disorders because I had been dealing with this my entire life and then going out into the world on my own at 18, of course. And then I worked with the general public my whole life as well. So here I'm working with the general public. I'm able to pinpoint this fairly quickly, fairly easily. And at the same time, I also have spiritual gifts that I was born with. So I was born that way. It's part of how I knew some of the things about my mother that I probably shouldn't have known. And then confronting her along with the poison batches of food around age 3 or 4, that just put everything on overdrive. So I'm able to see through people a little better and then see things in people that others probably don't see. Um, and then with confronting her in certain things I said, there's no way I could have known some of the things I said unless I was truly spiritually gifted. And I didn't know I was gifted. I wasn't aware that that was even a thing. She made sure that I did not know that. It was actually a friend of one of her cousins who told me how I'm gifted, what is actually going on. And then I told her who I was. I just told her my name and I told her some basic information. And by the end of the phone conversation, she knew who my mother was. They had met, I believe, numerous times. And at first, I thought she meant I was painting a good picture of who she is as a person. She knows who she is. No, she actually meant she knew who she was. Now, to this day, that cousin and that friend of that cousin are now deceased. But in 2019 is when she enlightened me fully on all of that and what I had going on from the time I was born that way, and had enlightened me on it, and it had always been a thing. And that's why I'm coming across all these additional problems, because here I'm a little bit gifted and I have abilities other people don't. And I was never aware because I was born that way. I just thought everybody was like that, and that's not true. Everybody's not like that. So that became fully known to me in 2019, although it was going on the entire time, all of my life. And that triggered my mother even more. And the fact that I can see through people triggered her even more. And here she is doing all these bad things and all this malicious activity. And I can see through her and I'm confronting her. So it created a further issue and more abuse because of that, more lies and delusions being passed around about me in the background. So then, she's telling this whole false narrative to all her family members, all her friends, all these people she knows every step of the way, all because of that. But yeah, it didn't become fully known to me until 2019. Although it's normal to me. So it's not like I feel like something's different. It's normal to me. But after my injury, it became amplified times like 100. Prior to the injury, it wasn't that prevalent. It wasn't that strong. So going forward, I was even more spiritually gifted than I was all those years. And then once I did finally start to struggle to try to work a little bit, the because I work with the general public, I was able to see how heightened it was right away. And it was actually kind of creepy because I crossed paths with all different types of people. So I'll get into this in its own playlist on some of these things I've experienced and what I've had to deal with and go through, because none of this is normal. It's not normal for a regular person to experience some of the things I've experienced. So I'll get into that later, way later down the line after I'm done talking about all this other stuff. But all along the way, yes, my mother was doing all of this for all of these reasons. I cut ties right when I bought my first home, right when I turned 18. I'd been at the same company for 2 years at that point. And I stayed with that company for almost 5 years before leveling up at a higher end restaurant where there was even more money was to be made there. So I was making really good money from the time I was 16. I was always making $500 to $1,000 a week, and made even more than that going forward. So it was never less than that my entire life. And So she didn't tell anybody that. She didn't tell anybody that I actually pay my own bills, that I've been off on my own, that I had my baby, and here I am in the home that I own and I take care of everything. And my son didn't even go over there except for like maybe a couple times a month for a couple hours on like a Saturday or something. He didn't even go over there until I think he was like two or so maybe. Um, but she had then kept all of the gifts that her family had sent. I don't know if it was money or actual gifts or both. Apparently, she had accepted all these gifts from people who sent me stuff when I was pregnant. She was never invited to the baby shower. I don't know if she told anybody that or not. She was never invited. And then she kept all these gifts and claimed to have raised that child, or that she had custody of and or raised that child. And that was never true. The child was never even over. The baby was never over there. So here I was in my own home working. It wasn't full time, but I was making full time money. I was working like 25, 28 hours a week. And then I was going to school 3 nights a week. So I had a full schedule, and I had a baby that didn't stop crying until he was 2 years old. So I did not sleep right until he was two. I never got proper rest until then for about those 2 years. But she lied to everybody about all of that, portrayed herself to have been taking care of this baby, and how dare I have this baby? I'm not supposed to have kids, and I'm young, and I'm dumb, and I'm this, and I'm that, and she has him, she has custody of him. Here, there's no contact whatsoever. I'd cut all ties with her. She was not there during labor and delivery. She was not allowed to be. She was not invited. And it was at the hospital she worked at, but she also wasn't working that day either. When I had my next child, she was working that day. She popped her head in the room twice for like, I don't know, not even a minute. And then I had a friend with me, and I looked at her and I was like, get her out of here. And my friend was like, being so nice about it. She did it in such a nice way. I don't even know how she did it. But she did. She said something and got her out of there. But either way, she was probably trying to portray to others around her and her coworkers that I'm upstairs having this baby, and I don't know what she said on why she's not there. But at no point was she ever invited to any of the baby showers or any of the births of any of my children during any of this. Same with my youngest. There was another baby shower because that child is 11 years younger than my second child. She wasn't invited to that baby shower. I'm not sure what she told people. I do know she told her next door neighbor that it was a joke when they found out I was pregnant with him. That, oh no, we're not going to be raising any more of her kids, and so clearly the neighbors thought that they had custody of and raised my older two kids, which that was not real either. And then she did say that when she found out I was pregnant with the youngest. So I will do its own episode on how none of my kids were actually welcomed to be born. Like, it was not a happy situation. It was not a welcoming situation with any of my pregnancies, any of my kids. There was something very wrong with all of that. I did have to hide the second two pregnancies. She didn't find out I was pregnant until I believe I was 7 months with my second child. And still, I was in my own home already for 3 years. And then my last child, she didn't find out until it was about 2 months before the baby was born. 2 months, no, 3 months. 3 months before the baby was born. Um, and then somebody I guess had told her, I don't know who, there wasn't too many people who knew. Either way, word got back to her somehow. And when it came out, when she was confronting me about it on Christmas, um, it you could tell that it was an issue, because then she acted like I had done something wrong, as if I was like 10 years old and I had done something wrong, and which is exactly why the pregnancy was being hidden. So being 32 years old and on your own for a long time, and at that point I had owned two homes, and here I was rebuilding from her 2013 escapade, which was a complete wipeout where I had to start over from nothing. So I was still rebuilding from that incident. It was only 3 years later. I was rebuilding from that. So I was renting it in that moment. But then my next home purchase was set back another year because of the pregnancy. Either way, I still bought the home I'm in a year after that, from this time period that I'm talking about. So it doesn't matter. At no point was I ever doing anything wrong. This was her portraying to others that I'm just this mental disorder, drug addict, hot mess, which I do believe she started portraying me to be that way around age 16, and continued it from that point to where we are today. And then also at age 16 was She had tried to get me diagnosed with a mental disorder with a psychiatrist out of Apex Behavioral Health in Inkster, Michigan, on Middle Belt Road. So I don't know if the place is still there, but she fed the psychiatrist the information that she was running off of. That lady was not perceiving the situation properly because I was so heavily abused and controlled and manipulated and gaslit that even when she talked to me alone, she wasn't perceiving the situation properly. But I do have the intake paperwork from that situation, and you can tell by what's written in it that I'm a hardworking teenager, that there is no mental disorder, I make really good money, and you can tell my next step is on my way out the door and not looking back. So I have the backup proof that everything that went on with that should have never happened, because she was able to convince this lady that I have depression, and get her to give me pills that I should have never been given. I only took them like 2 or 3 days. I knew I wasn't supposed to be on them. I didn't take them. There was no problem. The only problem was her. But still portraying to all these other people, including this lady, that she's just this nice person, this great person, and I'm this problem. Um, so she tried, that was the first attempt to try to have me deemed mentally incompetent so she could gain access to this trust fund. And then used those pills that I was given that I should have never been given to get me kicked out of high school in 11th grade. So in 11th grade is when I was already at my job and I just started working full time, and I was making really good money, and I didn't have that distress of the teacher calling in the background and the harassment and all these lies going around and all these problems being created. And I was actually at peace. I had like relief and peace, and I didn't have that going on. And it changed the mindset, changed my complete mindset of how I saw the future going forward and how I'm going to get out of this situation and get myself to safety. So that's where it all changed. By her doing that, then allowed me to work full time. I had 2 jobs and I was making really good money. And that's how I knew I was going to be in my next house a year later, which is exactly what happened. But she did attempt to use that lady. I believe it went on 4 to 6 months where she had me going to this lady. Um, and the lady just did not have this pegged properly, because most people aren't dealing with a deranged lunatic for a mother. Everybody always believes the mother. So I'm sure she said that to the lady at some point, and then she laughs like a deranged lunatic. But I do believe that the paperwork from that, or something, I'm not exactly sure, but I do believe those papers could have possibly been used to help her gain access to my trust fund. And I'm not exactly sure when she began gaining access to it, if it was after my first child or my second child, but that is how she did all of that. She did it by just repeating to everybody that I'm this mental disorder drug addict over the phone, with all these delusional phone calls with all her family and friends. And then these incidences that were occurring because of her actions. And then she goes, see, look what she did. See, look what she did. Or she's doing this now. Oh, you see what she did. All along the way, that had never stopped. I do believe that was even going on. I have some texts between my parents during his injury, my dad's injury a couple years ago. Same thing, still going on. Still no contact. This woman knows nothing about me. Here she's carrying out this entire false narrative every step of the way. Now, she did all of that out of the jealousy and envy over the trust being left for me. Trying to help carry out her long-term plan of making sure she gets that money and not me. So that's what's behind all of it being brought to the extreme degree that it was, from 1989-ish all the way to current day. That's what made it so extreme. But at the root, it was already jealousy and envy of my dad's attention being taken away from me. Everything. So all these delusional phone calls, everything. Or if there was an incident where she got jealous that me and my dad went and did something, the next day she would call a teacher and say something to get something started to make it look like I did this or that. Or she would call police and do the same thing. All along the way, that's something she has done. Even when we were working on this house, prior to me being forced out of it during the gas leak, same thing. Same with the urinary tract infection incidents with my dad. Same with the phone calls to the police. All of it. She did. It was all a jealousy and envy incident. So anytime he was at any of my houses cutting the grass or working on something with me, or when I was a younger child and we went, let's just say we went golfing, or we went here or we went there without her, there was another jealousy and envy incident. Those type of situations happened all the time with me growing up, just him and me going to do something. And he never realized that that's how she was treating me. And I didn't realize that he didn't know. So, and it stayed that way. So all these phone calls would come after we did this together, or he did this for me, or they were taking care of my grass, or whatever the situation, it didn't matter. Um, it was all over jealousy and envy. So each batch of poison food along the way, it's a jealousy and envy incident. So let's just say I'm 10 years old and we went golfing and it was a Sunday. For dinner, there'd be poison in our food for dinner. If he took me shopping and I got let's just say a pair of shoes, there'd be poison in the food for dinner. If, let's say she caused something and he actually believed me, then we'd get poison in our food. And like he wouldn't eat lunch. He would just go out to eat for lunch at work. So I can't really say lunch. And then from the time I was about 11 years old, I started eating lunch at school. So I never ate any packed lunches from her. So this really only pertained to dinner. And then I didn't eat breakfast. I stopped eating breakfast altogether. And that's also why, because she controlled the food. So I ate at school. My dad ate at work. So if any of these incidences happened, it would be usually dinner. And then along the way, once I was out on my own and she was getting people to slip poison batches of food into my houses, having my dad bring it over, and it's just over his head that that's what's going on. Even though he's admitted it in the past, I've gotten him to admit it many different times, and he would still bring it just out of habit, and him, her repeating delusions to him over and over again, and him just operating on it and just doing it, just in an altered state of consciousness, just doing it like that's normal. So it went on every step of the way. That's how she got the poison in the food. That's how she continued to do so. Each time it was a jealousy and envy incident. So let's just say the day he hung the lights that are above me, right in front of me, that was another incident. He'd come home and she'd poison his dinner, and then he'd be at the doctor the next day with another severe UTI. Same with on my birthday, he hung the chandelier in the front of my house by my front door. It's in a very strategic spot. It's very high up. He hung that, and I posted it on Facebook along with a couple other nice things a couple people did for me, a couple of cousins, and word must have got back to her. She poisoned his food very heavily after that incident. He was back at his doctor again with another severe UTI. So all these delusional phone calls and all these poison batches of food tie back to a jealousy and envy incident. Um, all along the way, from the time I was a small child, growing up, all the way in my own homes, it's been going on every step of the way. And every time so once I remove myself, then my dad's the main target. He's ingesting the bulk load of it all. And he's not comprehending what's actually going on. And he's continuing to ingest some of it. But what he has admitted long term is that her food tastes terrible, that it tastes like shit. He'll dump it in the garbage and go eat out. Or once I got into my own homes, he was eating dinner at my house on his way home from work, especially if he was picking up my kids to babysit them, because I'd be working a little bit later, and then they'd be going to bed right after that, and he'd bring them back early in the morning on his way to work. Um, any of those incidences, or even since I've been in this house for 8 years, I'd make sure he eats when he gets here. If he said he's coming here, I made sure, even when I was injured and I couldn't stand up, I made sure that dinner was ready for when he got here. And my oldest was cooking dinner the majority of my injury. He had to learn how to cook. He was about 15, 16. So he had to learn how to cook. We would make sure dinner was ready when he'd get here. So that way we were removing more of the poison batches of food. By this time, I was 100% certain in how it all worked, and each trigger, each incident along the way. By this time, I fully had it figured out. But all along the way, all those decades, that's what had been going on. It's all due to the jealousy and envy, every step of the way. And not only that, I had been making really good money all of these years, and she never did. And then she wanted to portray me to be codependent, like my dad pays my bills, my ex paid my bills, other people pay my bills, which was never true. So that's another jealousy and envy trigger long term over the course of my life, because I've been making really good money since I was 16. So there's all these triggers, all these different types of triggers along the way. And at the root, I also was a very cute little kid, a very cute baby. So that was another trigger. And then obviously I look the same way I do today as I have for the past 20, 25 years, which actually I had somebody reach out to me who's on my Facebook who said I look exactly the same as I did 25 years ago. So it kind of makes sense. So she's been jealous of what I look like, what I've been building, what I've been achieving, what I have, while controlling this false narrative in the background every step of the way. All jealousy and envy incidences mixed with these individual things along the way from the course of the time I was a child all the way to the current day. So that's what's behind everything. It's all 100% jealousy and envy on every level you can imagine. I will come back and talk more about how my kids were not welcomed with open arms. Thanks. Bye.